I thought it'd be fun to do a quick run through of some of the biggest blind spots that I observe in American culture. The first one is a distinction between happiness and normalcy. And what I mean by that is there are literally hundreds of things that can bring joy, playfulness, pleasure in the moment that feel good and that make perfect sense to do, except they're not normal. You think of standing on a street corner and giving free hugs. Makes everyone happy, not normal. Think of going shopping in pajamas. Feels great. Saves time. Raises an eyebrow. Makes life more interesting. Not normal. Think of dressing up as a clown or engaging in some kind of street art, not because you're good at it, but just to break up the routine. Brings adrenaline, brings interest, brings engagement to the city. A lot of fun, very easy to do, not normal. And there are literally hundreds of these, and will generally, as a cult, train people to be normal and unhappy. The next thing is in education, just looking at, if you make a list of everything that will be most useful for you to learn and do well in an entire life, from cooking to building a house to repairing plumbing or whatever it is that you make your list of. Make a list of 100 skills that would be really useful to know, and then map that with what you're going to learn in school, and you realize you're not getting an education at all. You're having a lot of your time wasted. Now, a very interesting thing is this phenomena of, and it ties in with normal, but the threat of strangers. And so all the time in America, I'll hear this phrase, but I don't know you. And this is one of the dumbest things that I've ever heard, because the argument goes that I'm not going to engage because I don't know you. And because I'm not going to engage, I'm never going to know you. And because I'm never going to know you, I'm not going to engage. When you realize that 99.9% of the planet is strangers, to rule that group out, particularly given the mediocrity of many of our lives, is absolutely absurd. The other thing that goes hand in hand with this thing is this looking for red flags and all these reasons to dismiss someone from our lives. And what's interesting about this is the data on loneliness. Loneliness is an absolute killer in the United States, and it's on the rise. It will kill you. It'll take at least 10 years off of your life. Now, strangers, on the other hand, will not absolutely take 10 years out of your life. You may learn a new skill. I learned one of the most useful things I've ever learned in my life, all about trauma, sitting down at a cafe table. And my first question to a stranger was, what's the most exciting and interesting thing going on in your life? He said, I'm taking a workshop on trauma. I said, what's that? He described it. I said, oh my goodness, that's a whole dynamic that I need to learn about. What's the best book to read on trauma? He gave it. 10 seconds later, I was ordering it on Audible. And what hadn't happened in $150,000 of therapy happened in the next 3 hours listening to that book. Now, real risks versus minutia ties into that, issue as well, because we have a cult protocol, and we'll get to coolness later on. We have a cult protocol that says, okay, that's a cool person, that's a good person, and they are the most bizarre and arbitrary filters for who you might want to connect with. Is someone famous? Or, statistically, this is a terrible idea. Statistically, famous people are going to be way more unhealthy than non-famous people. So why would you want to connect with unhealthy people just because everyone else has connected with unhealthy people? So you have real risks that are data-based versus minutia, and people being swayed by the minutia emphasized by the culture. We come into that same domain with relationship material. Who is relationship material? And we don't even break that down to understand what type of relationship do you want and what are the underlying traits that will generate that kind of relationship. And a lot of it is habits. For example, if you sleep well together and both people enjoy cuddling in just the right rhythm and position, 8 hours or an entire third of your life is going to pivot from maybe feeling empty, maybe feeling, frustrated or not being able to sleep well, to sleeping very well. That's a huge deal. You can't tell that at a bar, at, a dating profile, etc. And so we don't go deep and use the numbers. Sleeping well with someone is a really big deal. Having conversations that are good, that begin well, that develop well, and that end in intimacy and transformation in a positive direction is enormous. Sex is, frankly, not as important. The average person does it 2 times a week for an average of 20 minutes. That's 40 minutes a week. Cuddling and sleeping, on the other hand, talking, on the other hand, you're doing it all the time. So you have this what is and isn't relationship material. It's way skewed, and there's no discussion about that. The other thing that ties into this is the shortcut heuristics that we develop. Oh, they smoke or they don't smoke. The woman who made me laugh the most in my life by a 700% margin smoked. So what's the reason people are anti-smokers? For their health. If someone makes you laugh 7 times more than anyone else in your entire life, and laughter is good for your health, maybe the net benefit to your health is improved by marrying the smoker who makes you laugh that much. So we have to take things in an ecological framework, not these little short heuristics. Now, chauvinism versus science is a very big blind spot in our culture, because what chauvinism says is that the masculine, in Western cultures, the masculine role is more valuable than the feminine. So it says that I'm more valuable because I'm speaking than you because you're listening. And that is absolute nonsense. There is zero value in a speaker if someone isn't listening. And there's zero value in a listener if someone isn't speaking. There's zero value in a giver if someone isn't receiving. There's zero value in receiving if someone isn't giving. So there's a science, and then there's a cultural chauvinism that leads people to compete, to be masculine, to get social rank, while simultaneously spending more energy for less well-being. So you have a blockage in intelligence. Now, I think one of the biggest blind spots of all is the arrogance of culture. The root word of culture, cult. All a cult is a group of people that have decided to make a certain set of behaviors normal, and to teach everyone to do those behaviors regardless of how intelligent they are, regardless of how fun they are, regardless of anything, just because that's the thing we do in this cult. And what we don't educate our people about is that there have been 10,000 cults in human history. 10,000 cultures in human history, 10,000 languages in human history, 10,000 groups of people who all thought their way of doing things was the best way of doing things. Now, the statistical odds of our cult doing things better than all the other 9,999 cults that all thought their way was better is literally 1 in 10,000. And yet, rather than broadening out and getting to know through the lens of intelligence, the transformation of energy into sustainable well-being, time, money, natural resources, how much well-being can you create for how many people with a given block of time, money, and natural resources? That's intelligence. Well, one of the most fascinating and troubling things to discover as one travels the world is that the United States consumes more energy than any culture in human history, while generating more misery than many cultures in human history. So you realize they're consuming hundreds, if not thousands of times more energy and natural resources per unit, per individual. But, for example, we have suicide, something you cannot find in other mammalian groups. There's the tarsier monkey in Philippines is the only mammal that I know that commits suicide to get out of the misery of the tourists who plague it. And then we have human beings who kill themselves to get out of the misery induced by their cult. Cool versus intelligence. Again, we have various things, and of course our manufacturers spend billions of dollars selling the idea that if you do these things and wear these things, you will have sex, you will be popular, you will be secure, and you will have high self-esteem. So it's basically saying, buy these shoes and your base 4 human needs will be met: survival, security, love and belonging, and self-esteem. And we tolerate this deception and base our economy on this deception, despite the fact that shoes or hats or sunglasses, particularly the bizarre joke of sunglasses indoors, has never generated, except for the programming of media, it has never generated survival, security, love and belonging, and self-esteem, nor should it. The general rule is if you tell all those name brands to fuck off and spend the money on cheap copies, and then invest in your education, in your travel, in your global, in your global education, you'd be way better off. And so we have foisted this deception on our people, and it leads to other people buying into the heuristic codes created by advertisers to actually going along with it. Oh, that person's dressed well, that person did that, and that's cool, and so I want to be associated with that. Smart versus emotional literate, or emotional literacy, is another blind spot. We're constantly talking about people who are intelligent, but going back to the education protocol, some of the most degreed individuals on the planet are statistically more depressed and miserable than the average person. So we have this tension, again, between what's considered highly educated and happiness and well-being. And so the proposition that a university might make is, we'll take $200,000 of your money, give you a student debt, teach you a whole bunch of things that are not going to help you wash the dishes, cook food, enjoy your family. You will be statistically likely to be more depressed than the average person and can then proceed to pay off your debt. You take someone else, and I remember I had a wonderful friend who every time she went into the room, she just brought peace and well-being. It was just delightful watching people light up around her. She had no goals, no ambition, no education to speak of, very poor woman financially, and yet she brought, literally, more happiness and well-being than almost anyone that I've met. And we undervalue that trait. There's no Fortune 500 list for the people that do that. And yet, I was intelligent enough to make her the single most important person in my life, despite the fact that we were not sexually compatible, because I got to be that person, with well-being lifted, and I got to see the people that she touched. I consider her incredibly valuable, incredibly intelligent. And yet that's not how we define intelligent, which is a huge blind spot. We need more people like her and less bigoted assholes going around talking about their degrees and raping our natural resources through new algorithms of mining more efficiently to produce more junk that we don't need more rapidly. We have will versus environment and the emphasis on the individual. It's a huge blind spot. We have limited amounts of will, and the best use of will is to create an environment that induces well-being. But we do the exact opposite. We create isolated individuals in pyramid kind of structures where everyone has their own catered environment. So we create lots of loneliness, we create lots of dissociation, we create lots of emotional literacy, and then we expect willpower to somehow overcome all those obstacles. It doesn't. And so the real focus needs to be on creating an environment that brings out the quality of life and the quality of the individual we want to experience. Finally, there are a whole plethora of really important life experiences that are largely neglected within our culture. So the first one is birthing well. And we've created traumatic, sociopathic hospital experiences for the birthing environment for most people that are induced and chemically affected in a variety of ways. This is a travesty for the first few days in life. Having a good water birth with a doula attuned to the birthing environment is incredibly valuable. Now, we move then on to relationships. Having a relationship template with the masculine and feminine in a secure, attached, and healthy way, educating parents on how to really attune to their children is one of the most vital skills for our future as a species. We do almost nothing of that. The art of belonging, creating a strong, stable sense of belonging outside the family unit as a cultivated skill, incredibly important. I don't think I've ever gotten a single lesson in my cult other than fit in by doing the insane things that other people are doing. Developing personal gifts, understanding that each person is predisposed to have a certain area that they shine, learning what that is, and finding that as a community and finding a good place for that, leading to each individual having the ability to create a unique role for themselves to contribute that gift in the community is an incredible source of abundance within any community. That's never happened in my experience. Learning how to grieve well and end well. 95% of all our relationships in our culture end, romantically or otherwise, for reasons other than death. That means if we have an ending, a grieving, and a dying process that's beautiful, we will grow. Learning about health, the diet, the exercise that actually creates mental, emotional health, and creating a community protocol that facilitates that is incredibly important and largely absent. figuring out what we each want to create that is new, that we bring something into the world that is new, that didn't exist before, is also incredibly valuable. Transcendent sexuality is an experience that every human being should have the opportunity to have access to understand that it exists, that there are altered states of consciousness that can emerge in the depths of love, in the depths of safety, in the depths of the endogenous chemicals within the human body that can lead to a sense of connecting with something bigger than just the other human being, with the divinity, with the larger environment. As part of that consciousness, learning what is consciousness and the full range of our consciousness, and particularly learning to track the consciousness that goes from the reptilian brain with the fight, flight, freeze mechanism, the limbic system, going up into that fusion areas where we're aware of our limbic system and reptilian brain, moving into our dreaming capacity, which brings me to another point, which is lucid dreaming. It's an incredible oasis. If you can learn things, experience things, enjoy things in an additional 1/3 of your life, it is a profound gift. The art of creating good friendships and keeping those friendships in a way that brings healing and that softens the volatility of crisis and tragedy. And finally, the art of dying well, surrounded in a cocoon of people who love and attune and who understand the honor, integrating our generations so that young people have a chance to spend time with their elderly and learn what the elders have come to see with vision and wisdom, which is otherwise not touching our young people. Dying well. This is a short list of the greatest blind spots that I'm aware of, with the intention, along with the other maps in this series, that you bring light, bring awareness, and respond so that unnecessary suffering can be eliminated by becoming aware in the areas that our culture is blind.